Welcome to the Thresholds of Reality, the podcast where we explore unexplained and mysterious events, phenomena, and legends. Today we are talking to Dr. Michael Dennin, a well-known professor and physicist known for popularizing science for the public. He's taught many online courses on the nature of science, the intersection of faith and science, as well as appeared on many television programs, some of which you may be familiar with, like Ancient Aliens, Spider-Man Tech, Batman Tech, Star Wars Tech, and The Unexplained. Strap in as we explore the edges of the unknown. Dr. Dennin, it is such a great pleasure to have you on the program. We've had a couple of your Ancient Aliens colleagues on. We've had Robert Clotworthy, the narrator, and Hugh Newman, who blew our minds with his exploration regarding giants. And one of the things, I was watching Ancient Aliens last night, and they had a clip of you on. It was probably less than 30 seconds.
Right.
And I was like, I wonder if they just sit these guys down, rattle through a bunch of clips, and then spread them out through a whole season. Tell me a little bit about that process.
Yeah, so we'll pull the curtain back on the magic. It's usually, I will record, probably for anywhere from sort of 2 to 5 episodes for a season or a half season, depending on the topics. I am officially the friendly skeptic. That's my official title. They don't put it under my name at all, but it should be there. The focus is always something in physics or science, a wide range of science. And it's just, boom, 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 question. And then they figure out which ones end up in which show. And for me, it's kind of a fun process because I love talking about those things. And it also is nice. I get the questions ahead of time, so there's some time to think about it, look stuff up. But yeah, that's pretty much what it is. You nailed it. They just ask me a ton of questions, and then some make it in and some don't.
So how did they come to your doorstep? You're a physicist at UCI, and they're like, this guy should have some answers regarding aliens. Like, how did they get to you?
Well, it actually came through all the other shows you mentioned. So Prometheus, the producer, was the producer on the Spider-Man Tech, Science of Superman, Batman Tech, Star Wars Tech. And that's where I started with them. It's one of these fun things. It was probably 10, 15 years into my career. I was doing a course on the science of superheroes. And the story I tell everyone, which is true, is the Orange County Register clearly had a slow day in the science news. And the science reporter called me up and said, "What's up with this class? It's clearly a wimpy class because it has a fun title." And then I told him what I make the students do. And he's like, "Oh, wait, that's a real class." And then the LA Times picked it up. And so when Prometheus was doing the science of Superman, back when the Superman reboot movie came out, the first non-Christopher Reeve one, they called me and they did sort of a test interview, and then they came out to my lab, and we were all equally shocked. It turns out I'm really, really good at answering questions in a short way that make just enough sense that people want me on TV. And more importantly for TV producers, that usually has an image they can use as some stock footage to throw up behind me.
So you're basically the textbook photos and captions personified.
Exactly. That is what I am. And also I apparently do it I'm getting old now, so I slip up and we sometimes have to do retakes. But when I was young, I could do like an entire interview straight through and there wouldn't be a single retake, which is also apparently unusual. I claim it's just I'm incredibly, incredibly good at talking about anything.
That's great. Well, that will serve you well in the podcast space, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, it takes us to our next question, which is, regarding these tech shows, they were probably looking for your physics take. Tell me about some of the craziest stuff that they presented to you, and were you like just letting them down easy, like Superman's not gonna fly?
Yeah, so it's funny. My wife, I think, does the best description of this because Science of Superman was first and Spider-Man Tech was second. She goes, it's really funny because you watch you on Science of Superman, and every time you're like, that's a really good question, but no, it couldn't happen, and here's why. Right. And my favorite one is talking about how, when Superman flies and saves Lois Lane, you can actually estimate the force, and it's usually greater than hitting the ground. So you would actually, if Superman's flying at you, say, no, please let me drop. I've got a better chance with the ground than I do with you.
So they actually mentioned that they had that discussion on the Big Bang Theory. I wonder if they actually got it from you.
They may have stolen it from me. I may have to reach out and get some,
get some royalties.
Yeah, royalties. Whereas with Spider-Man, he's my favorite superhero. I do not deny this. And, there is a lot just with his webs, his climbing. We've built interesting technology that allows you to climb walls almost like Spider-Man, just using, nanoparticles and various things. So there's just like a lot of good science in Spider-Man once you get past the fact that he's probably not as strong as he is portrayed in the movie and a few other things. And so my wife said, then you watch Spider-Man Tech and you're like, yeah, no, that physics is really good. So it really varied from show to show. My own personal disappointment is I'm still trying to figure out how to make a lightsaber. So Star Wars Tech, I really want the lightsaber to be true. I can't solve the massive heat problem. I think, any real lightsaber would melt your hand while you're holding it. So
yeah, I have actually seen some videos of guys trying to recreate lightsabers, and they basically created a plasma torch.
Yeah, I mean, that's what you're going to make, some version of a plasma torch. And if it's going to be at I think the power of a lightsaber, the energy needed to make that plasma is probably going to melt your hand.
Yeah. The real problem is containing it into like a solid beam, right?
Well, it is and it isn't, because from a physics point of view, that probably has a solution, right? Finding the magnetic field and figuring out how to generate it to contain your plasma is probably very hard, but solvable. Whenever you like, I love talking about superheroes and science fiction and all this stuff. And in the end of the day, the thing that usually gets you is the energy needed to do something. And the fact that the second law of thermodynamics tells us whenever you generate energy, you generate waste heat. And it's the waste heat. My other fun one is, when Yoda lifts the X-Wing out of the swamp in Empire Strikes Back, the force he's using to do that would probably, again, generate enough waste heat that he'd burst into flame. Unless he also figures out a way. I mean, maybe the force allows you to dump the heat somewhere else, right?
Or acoustic levitation. What did they?
Well, no, but even acoustic is energy, and the acoustic levitation and energy makes heat somewhere. I mean, that's where physics.
I don't even know how that works.
Neither do I, but I know it always makes heat.
That's great. So this title of ancient astronaut theorist, how does one achieve that title? Are you one of them, or are you an ancient astronaut skeptic?
I'm going to stick with friendly skeptic. I am an ancient astronaut skeptic. I mean, the ancient astronaut theorist. So, I talk to a bunch of them at various times. Usually I'm filming in my physics lab and I don't run into them or meet them. They get filmed somewhere else. My only regret is people ask me this. I don't get to travel to the cool spots. I get filmed in my lab. They get filmed in cool places around the world. But it really, comes down to, it started with von Däniken and recognizing that there are so many stories of angels or other creatures visiting the earth, right? There's lots of ways you can think about those. And one could be that they were aliens and astronauts, right? And then you start asking, okay, well, can you build any evidence for that? And this is where, a lot of what's in Ancient Aliens is a little different than really straight doing science, only in the sense of it's more of a, I like to describe it as more of like a crime investigation than a science experiment, right? They're very similar in the tools you'd want to bring, but when you're looking at what happened in the past, it's not like you can recreate the experiment. So you're really dealing with the clues and things you have, and you're piecing together what likely happened. Just like when you investigate a crime, it's not like you know have 10 versions of the crime happen and compare your notes and see what goes on. I mean, that's what a science experiment is. You do it 10 times and take data. So it's a challenging thing from that perspective. So I think it is useful to have lots of different people thinking about it and looking at it. And you know, I bring my own perspective as a skeptic for my own. I have a bunch of reasons why. We can chat about some of those. I'm a weird skeptic because I'm convinced aliens are out there elsewhere in the universe and we'll eventually run into them. I'm just skeptical that we already have, I guess, you know, that's kind of a middle of the road view.
Yeah, so I would say, or what I would like to know is, do the producers hand you a set of assumptions and say, well, you're a skeptic based on the information that you have, but let's assume X, Y, Z. How does that change your answer? Did they ever give you hypotheticals like that?
Yeah, both happened. I mean, and depending on the exact hypothetical, like a lot of it comes down to where my expertise comes in is we look at often things. You know, the show mostly focuses on the ancient aliens, but let's take current UFO sightings, for instance, right? Which we don't do a lot in the show. You know, a lot of it is predicated on, oh, that thing just violated the laws of physics, right? And
Right.
well, that's not going to happen, right? That's a fun phrase to say, but it's also very, I think, interesting to ask, okay, given the video evidence, and we know that the laws of physics aren't violated, we also know which laws of physics might not be as solid as we think they are. That's a different question. But the ones we know that are solid, what else could that be? Right. And that I also really enjoy thinking about. Like, okay, how could you achieve that? What would that look like? You know, one of my favorite things, you know, a lot of the accelerations and things that you see in videos are not as inconceivable to imagine generating as you might think. But they would kill almost anything carbon-based life form. Right.
Right.
You would just be crushed by it. So the question is then, you know, okay, hypothetically, would it be a droid? What happens to machinery? Like, how much more reliable is machinery under those conditions? Would it just be a completely different life form? Is it just, you know, nothing in there? So I love doing that, you know, Sam. Those are the kind of hypotheticals that are fun. And then in terms of stuff in the past, for me, it's fun to think about the skeptic side comes in. How would people have done that? Right. I get that it looks really, really hard, but I also think we're shockingly smart and creative. So, okay, if we rule out alien technology, as the skeptic, it's up to me to like present, well, okay, well, what would be the alternative that people could do?
Yeah. So the idea of ancient structures can't possibly be man-made.
Right.
Um, you know, we can name a list that have been challenged. Right. The Great Pyramids always come up.
Yeah.
That there's no way they could have moved all that stuff without modern technology, or even modern technology isn't sufficient to move all
Right.
that stuff. It's like, okay, well,
I have to admit, I just recently went. I'm in California now, but I recently was back east visiting my family, and I hadn't been to Manhattan in a long time. And driving around Manhattan, I'm like, no, this is an impossible city. I'm sorry, I don't believe like these. Where did these skyscrapers made all of glass come from? Like, who would conceive of this as a good idea and then
Right.
try and do it?
That's a great point. Yeah, but so let's review. Which of these do you think is plausibly affected by alien technology? So the pyramids of Giza.
Yeah, I think for me, those are pretty easily humans. And part of it is we have more than enough good written records. And I think modern humans sort of underestimate the power of just a lot of people working hard for something.
Yeah. Stonehenge.
Stonehenge is I think, also one where its simplicity makes it easy to understand how people could have built it. I think its size is what overwhelms us. But actually, that was the very first thing I ever talked about in the, I don't know. The first thing they asked me about that I was filmed discussing for the very first Ancient Alien pilot was like moving the stones to get Stonehenge and lifting them. And that is some very, very basic human tools in engineering. So Stonehenge and the pyramids are the easy ones for me.
Okay. Let's go New World. Let's go Teotihuacan in Mexico.
Which is, remind me which one that is. I always get
Aztec
confused by the name.
pyramids. They've got the Pyramid of the Sun, Pyramid of the Moon.
Oh, right. Yeah. And again, to me, fundamentally, anything pyramid, I have no problem with people building, right? Because pyramid is the easiest big structure to make. It's the most stable. If I'm going to be a little silly, you pile any bunch of rocks and you get a pyramid. So yes, there's some work to get really nice looking pyramids. That's harder. But even like the step pyramids, those pyramids and just simple big blocks, those are my easy ones.
Yeah.
What about the Kessel run in 12 parsecs?
I'm sorry, what?
What about the Kessel run in 12 parsecs?
Yes, so that I'm really glad we actually got the Han Solo movie to explain why that was hard. And it's a funny thing, right? Like that's the ongoing joke that it's a distance, but they use it as a time, and then they turn it into a distance when they do it in the Han Solo movie. And what really confuses physics students is we often in physics use units of measure where the speed of light we declare just to be 1 with no units, and then distance and time are all measured in units of the speed of light. And so it really is kind of a funny mistake that turns out to be realistic, that from a physics point of view, yeah, we'll measure, time and distance and time. I mean, when you live in LA, right? Like if you ask anyone how far away something is, you always get a time, right. You always get 2 hours, 1 hour, 30 minutes, depends on the time of day. No one gives you a distance.
The 405 doesn't operate under the normal laws of physics.
No, it doesn't. So see now, if you listed 405 in your examples of alien technology, that I might rate higher.
That's great. So the ancient pyramids, like, debunked, right? The ancient aliens, come on, debunked. Is there any structure where you're like, okay, this one we might take another look at?
I think what's interesting to me is it's less about structures and thinking about what role or what impact ancient aliens might have had on the history and what we did. Right. So, to be honest, there's never been sort of a building or a structure, whether it's the NASDAQ lines or whether it's walls where things are put close together. I've had just enough pleasure working with machinists to just see, one, how incredibly clever humans are. What machinists can build has less to do with the fact that they have automated tools and just human ingenuity. And a lot of the things we look at, like, oh, those rocks are really spherical. And then you learn, yeah, spheres are easy to make. It's if they were octagonal or something, that we'd be more impressed. But the thing that's tricky is if aliens did visit in the past and merely interacted with us, that's harder to prove and more likely to get lost, right? Because it's a little more ephemeral. And it always comes down to me, like I said, I believe there's actually alien life forms out there, and I believe there's intelligent ones. I think just it would be very, very odd for it to be Earth the only place this happened. And when people describe the statistics of it, I think they think about it incorrectly. What is intriguing is, okay, by the time you reach the point that you can travel through space, like, what's your view and reason for doing that, right? So, like, if you look at humans, whenever we went to a new place, we pretty much conquered whoever was there. And we were pretty disruptive, right? There's not a lot of examples of a bunch of humans moving a long distance to another bunch of humans and going, oh, yeah, no, you all look good. Okay, we'll just leave you alone and leave, right? Or, oh, you know what? You all look sick. We'll cure you and leave. right? So what would be the alien culture, and what would be their view and reasons for visiting us in a way that humans continue and kind of get to be left on their own, but what has changed? I think that's kind of a really interesting space. Of course, it's the hardest to get any evidence about or to really prove anything in.
Yeah, if you're gonna make the long journey, it's for a reason. It's not really just to say hi.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Right. Are we the result of a long journey and somebody colonizing Earth? You would never know, right? I mean, and if we are, why did they start the colonists so like technologically unadvanced?
Yeah,
Were we a prison
show.
colony? I don't know.
It's like a survival show. Naked
Yeah,
and
exactly.
afraid.
Maybe we're the longest running survival show. They're still beaming it out to.
Yeah, that's probably
there are aliens that are glued to their TVs right now.
Right, exactly. Well, I do make the bad joke that the only way I know that we're not a computer simulation, there's this theory that our reality is a computer simulation, is I've got to be the world's boringest video game. So why would anyone do my life as their computer simulation?
Yeah.
That's
Well, I don't know that you're
the
the
same
most
way.
No, it's probably not the most boring, but on a video game scale, I think I fall into the boring
Right.
category.
Yeah, and most people don't have those kinds of things happen to them on a daily basis.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
Maybe we're NPCs.
Yeah, that's right. We're all the NPCs running around.
that's a good point. So when we look at you, we were looking at your work, your body of work, not just the stuff that's on TV, but I was watching this lecture you did on the intersection of faith and science.
Yes.
And I feel like that's a really interesting space. There's a lot of things happening right now that feel like an intersection of faith and science. Not to get too political, but I thought it was a really interesting declaration by Dr. Anthony Fauci, who says, "I am science."
Yeah.
You're criticizing me, you're criticizing science. And then he announces his retirement, and then the Babylon Bee says, "Oh no, science is retiring."
Right. Yeah, I think I wrote the book I wrote partly because the public discussion was frustrating me. And then I realized I wrote a book that will never make any money because it wasn't controversial enough. Right? Like, the theory of capitalism is you have to yell at someone or hate someone for your book to sell. And my book says we should all get along. So immediately it was, a failure. But I do think it's really unfortunate that sort of things in the U.S. and elsewhere in the world, but the U.S. in particular, sort of evolved to this place where there's two main voices in the public sphere. The voice, and both of them say science and religion don't work together, right? And one of them says, we're scientists, and if you are at all rational, you will reject religion, and that's your only choice. And the other side says, well, we have our religion from wherever, Christian, it's the Bible, Muslim, it's the Quran, various places, Hebrew, it's the Hebrew scriptures, the Torah and such. And we're like, there are things we just really think are true, and we're going to believe that over science. And what that dichotomy completely misses is they're just two different ways of trying to understand different aspects of the world. I saw somebody, I wish I could remember who it was, because I would like to give them credit for this, but they pointed out that science is about how the physical exterior world works, and it's very good at that. And it's actually not something you believe or don't believe in. Science is something you understand. It's a very different thing. And when you understand it, you realize science is mostly about trying to figure out what we don't know, not what we do know. So science is best at telling you where the errors are, what we don't know, where the boundaries are. And then in a small space, we've narrowed down things that we do know. Whereas faith is much more, and religion is much more about the inside, who we are, what's our relationship with the world. If there is a God, what's our relationship with God? it's a whole different set of questions that require a different set of tools. They intersect some, but it's really it would be cool if we could just get to a different conversation around it. And it doesn't help, Sam, you mentioned this. It doesn't help that both have become political, right? Like there's no reason your political party should have anything to do with whether you have a religious belief or not. Like it mystifies me that, but I mean, we know why. You can look at why politicians found that a powerful tool, and likewise, science shouldn't really be political. But again, you can understand over the last 10 or 20 years why that happened.
Right.
And both of those are kind of unfortunate.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is an interesting way to kind of look at this question, one of the things that kind of dawned on me is that human reason has been around a relatively short while.
Yeah,
we've been using logic and evidence for a very short time, but we've been trusting our gut, using our instincts for a lot longer. And so, a lot of times I have a question: which one of those is more reliable?
right. Well, you raise a great point, and it's one of the reasons I had a colleague of mine who talked about why sometimes people really end up distrusting science is for over 90% of your life, you actually should just use your gut. It's incredibly well involved. It's excellent, right? You're not going to make a decision about stepping into the road based on some calculation you do of physics. You have a gut instinct of whether that car's close enough to hit you or not.
Right.
Right. And you go with it. Right. And that's just developed. And if you don't have a good gut instinct, you got wiped out of the population and evolution took care of you. Right. not to be crude, but, and so, and if you look at it, I at the risk of being political, I think the pandemic and the science during that is a great example of science being about what we don't know and being wrong, playing out in real time. So most of the time, I would say, roughly the first year of the pandemic, while doctors and chemists and people were both trying to figure out how the virus worked, figured out how you do a vaccine. While they're trying to figure everything out, we got to see that in ways you normally don't.
Right.
Normally, the period where scientists don't know what's going on is happening in our lab and we're not publishing it, right? By the time we've made all the mistakes, right, you've gotten it out. But when society has a lot of people dying, it's somewhere between your gut and science. At that point, you're trying to make best guess estimates to at least minimize it until you know more, right? And that is that weird, when you're not in the middle of doing science, that weird part of science gets a lot of things wrong until it gets it right. It's just hard to wrap your head around, and then sort of your gut gets a lot of things right until it gets it wrong, because that's what it was trained to do. So to your point, Sam, knowing which one to use when is I think exactly the right question.
Yeah. And one of the things that I thought was, you're describing the process of science, but in the public eye. And this is why I think this question of the intersection of science and faith is really interesting, is because scientists were acting like religious leaders.
Yeah.
Saying, hey, don't question me. Don't look behind the curtain. Do what I say and everything will go fine.
Yeah. And I think, some are better at it than others, but you're right. I think there was a few too many, particularly early on. And I've talked to some colleagues who are in public health, but weren't necessarily very in the public eye part of public health this time around. Either they weren't expertise in this area of public health or whatever. And I think nobody who is on the outside, but part of science looking at it, would say, you know what, we didn't make a lot of mistakes in messaging kind of at the beginning, because it should have much more had the flavor of, look, one, we know this isn't going to hurt you right now. And two, this is our best guess at what's going to help you the most. And we will have a better guess in 2 months. But for now, you should do this until we know better. That's our recommendation. And then 2 months later, you could refine the advice, right? It was kind of, but this is why I'm a professor and I sit in my office and I write books and I go on YouTube and don't like get involved in making big government decisions. Cause I also wouldn't want that pressure. Like it's real easy to go back and say, you know what, you also in the middle of a pandemic where everyone's dying, it would have been much better to do it this way.
Yeah, what do they got? Monday morning quarterback, right?
Yeah. But to your point, if we don't learn those things going forward, the next science crisis, we don't want to repeat those mistakes. So there's value in doing the assessment and going back and looking at it. So you got to take both.
Yeah. I find it very fascinating that there's a lot of people out there, you know, the Christian apologists who try to treat the Bible like science. And then you have the pandemic turning scientists into faith leaders.
Yeah.
And it's a really interesting dynamic. It's kind of like, well, you know, how do we deal with that?
It really is. And it's also, you know, I think about this all the time. I mean, this is the definition of civilization that I learned when I was a kid in high school, right? It's when humans started to specialize, right? And as soon as we specialize, you start having to figure out, how do I trust experts? Mm-hmm. Right. And right now our tension is sort of experts on, you know, science, experts on faith. You know, the whole point of having experts is so you don't have to do the 20 years of work it takes to understand something the way they do. So you have to have some trust in them. But, you know, at the same time, there's risk when you put trust in them. I mean, I just think of, you know, sort of the experts when it comes to any time there's a banking crisis, right? It's like, yeah, we trusted you that, you know, bundling all those home loans and doing all this and all of that wouldn't be a problem. And now you're telling me, yeah, we screwed it up, but we're too big to fail. So give us all your money. Like, I'm supposed to do that? Like,
yeah, that's a great example.
You know, it's kind of like, okay, yeah, you know, you are the experts, you know, so we see that in all areas of life. And it's a real, to your point, we have our gut instincts and we have our experts, and we're always trying to go back and forth and figure out where is that balance.
Yeah, my dad is also a man of science, a man of faith, and he has spent a lot of his brain power trying to reconcile the two things.
Yeah.
But I remember a conversation we had not too long ago, and I kind of touched on this subject, but he said, I asked him, Dad, at what point did you feel like you had it all figured out? And he says, I'll let you know when I get there.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. I mean, I think to me, the greatest similarity between people of real faith and real science is that they are equally confused and don't understand what's going on.
Yeah.
And they're on a journey to just get to a little more understanding. I think the one place for me where I kind of get a little definite in this discussion is, I think the people on the religion faith side, the challenge to them is to stop thinking of your religion faith as magic. Right. And that's where a lot of the conflict comes, right? It's not magic. I would love magic. I mean, I see your superhero, you know, posters behind you. Yep. You know, actually Doctor Strange or Scarlet Witch, that would be awesome if that was real. I'm still trying to figure that out. Right. But true religion and faith is not about magic. It really is about having a deeper understanding of the nature of reality, of what that is, what it means. The way I phrase it is, does reality actually care about me? Right. Ultimately, a loving God is a statement that reality cares about you in some way, which blows the mind. It's where I'm at. Not everybody's at that. That's fine. And likewise, on the science side, the best scientists do have humility about their science, right? It's like, this is our best understanding now. You know, there are some things like energy is conserved and the second law of thermodynamics works. I'm like, yeah, someday, somewhere, we might find something that violates it, but we've seen it confirmed so many times. It's just not worth the energy to think about it being violated, right? Like, okay, I'm always open to it being violated, but I can't spend a lot of time and energy, and I'm certainly not going to invest in anything that you tell me violates those because the odds are just too small. But in other spaces, yeah, have the humility as a scientist to say, okay, here's the error bars. Here's what we know and what we don't know. And this is our best recommendation to you on how to deal with it. But there are some risks.
So there's this kind of guiding principle that I have adopted, and it's going to sound really silly, but it says that
It can't sound any sillier than anything I've said, Sam. So go for
well, I'm no ancient astronaut theorist, but
Right.
this is what I've come up with. Okay, and that is life proceeds in 4 phases. You believe in Santa, you don't believe in Santa, you are Santa, you look like Santa.
Oh, I'm getting there. I'm getting there.
I think we've all got a little bit of gray in our beards.
I'm experimental evidence of your theory, Sam.
And the reason why I think this is so great, and this is
Yeah.
like the next part of it is the part that kind of transformed me. But
Right.
Santa is just another name for God.
Right.
And it's like, okay, well, now we can do an equivalence, swap the word Santa for God, and then that changes everything.
Yeah.
But that's kind of how I see it. That's my religion right now, is being Santa.
Yeah. Well, I think if you look at, so if you distinguish between faith and religions, and you look at most religions, right, their challenges, they're ultimately run by people. I do claim most things in life would be better without people involved. Some things are better with people, but some things, we're what messes it up. And almost every religion has a mystical tradition that talks about how you are God, right? And that is something I think we really need to take seriously. And it aligns with the 4 things you said, right? Is what does that really mean? How do we live that? How do we embody that? And then they have what is rightfully called religious practices. And I think what happens is we take that, which means what it means. Like, think about anything you do. If you're going to get better at it, you have to have things you practice, right? But we tend not to make those into dogma. Like if you were training to be a top athlete, right, the practice regime you go through, right, evolves and changes based on what we learn about getting better at being a top athlete. And I think sometimes religions get stuck and they forget the goal and they focus on the practices. And that's where I think religions run into trouble, right? Is they become too much about that side of things.
Yeah, I think
and
that's
your statement really captures that transformation and that journey.
Yeah, I think the practices fit in the first category, right? You believe in Santa. You get on the nice list, you get the gift. You get on the naughty list, you get the cold. Those are the rules that you need to know.
And you start with those, and then you evolve beyond them. It's just like, I remember learning to play the piano. The first set of practices were simple scales, and then at some point I played much more complicated practice drills. And I think we tend to get stuck in the stage 1 of religion, or maybe stage 2, and we don't really make it out to stage 3 and 4.
Yeah. So bringing it back into the science realm, what do you think about Congress's recent report? I think it came out a couple days ago. They said that the UFO threats are proliferating exponentially, and we don't know what to do about them. They're not man-made. What do you think about that?
I think this is an interesting point in time. I don't know that I would call them threats, because I'm way too easygoing, but that's a different issue. But one of the things that certainly is true is both our technology and our detection skill abilities are getting better and better. And so 2 things happen when you get to that point. One is, if there are strange things out there that we don't know about and haven't identified in the past, we may now identify and see them, right? They may or may not be alien. They may have been things that are just phenomena that have been happening all along that we just weren't able to detect because we didn't have good enough equipment. And so there is a very first step of investigation you have to do anytime your measuring equipment gets better. And we have to know we're there. Also, with our technology getting better, and more people having more and more technology in their hands, whether it's countries, whether it's individuals, that creates more noise that we have to sift through, right? And we have been at the top of the technology chain for a very long time in America. I would, in terms of threats, I think there's a real question of, are places like China, what is happening with their technology? What is going on? What are they developing that we may or may not know about? And to what degree is that a threat? And so that's an unidentified object threat of a non-alien nature, right? Like, so there's that there. And then the third is, I said I don't think aliens have visited in the past, and I know they're out there somewhere, right? There is the very real question of how and when will contact be made, right? And you look at we've already made it to the moon with humans. We've sent our space probes outside of the solar system. They've made it that far. We've sent plenty of things to Mars. We now have the Webb telescope, which can see planets better than it's ever seen before. And we will actually start being able to measure atmospheres that are consistent with having life, if they're there, which they will be. It'll just be time till we find one. We have high-powered energy that can send signals out and, in principle, detect signals coming in. So if we're close to this and there's life elsewhere, just given the age of the universe, either some other people have reached space travel already, or they're about to, or they did, 1,000 years ago and they've made it this far. So I do think we're somewhere in the ballpark in human history of when contact will be made. And there really is the unknown question of what that will look like and how likely it is, And I feel like, I talked about science, being honest about the error bars. We in my mind, we moved within the error bars. It could happen. If I was still betting and predicting, I'd say it's somewhere between 100 to 1,000 years off as a minimum. But that's my gut, Sam. That's not science. I'll be clear to which I'm using for that.
I appreciate that. Appreciate you making the distinction. So with all of the new kind of admissions that there's all these UFOs around, and that idea that there's people out there or entities out there, we've had a lot of folks come on our program and make claims, and we don't spend a lot of time debunking them. I'll be honest. I'll be frank.
Yeah.
We let people say their piece, and then we let our audience decide what they believe and what they don't believe. One of the things that was brought up was this idea that UFOs are living entities that are here now.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
Again, that
quick take.
This goes to the interesting category of, could there be things around that are things we just never detected and they're showing up more because of some change or something? It's so first of all, like, it's an appropriate response on you all to not try and debunk things, because debunking is a weird thing. It's hard to do because it's always an event none of us can go back and look at together, right? We're always just talking about the evidence of what evidence survived the event and then trying to evaluate it. It's like a crime scene, as I said. And I think in most cases, something real happened, right? There is fraud, but I think that's limited. And then so it does become challenging to think about what is the space of possible things and then how probable are each of them. I would definitely say that something living we're not aware of, or something living behaving in a strange way, is at this moment in time more likely than aliens coming. As we move into the future, I'd probably change the probabilities on those.
Yeah.
So for for space travel, what would you think our best route is? Because everything is so far away for humans. So we had one person say that the use of vortexes is something we need to figure out. But what is your thought on actually getting humans to travel?
Yeah. So I am an overly optimistic physicist in this regard. So look, you could just do what in all science fiction that I love is called slow ships. do some version of building a ship big enough that you just live for generations and you don't actually make it somewhere, but your kids do.
It's like
Or
an
we
art.
could figure out how to do really good sleep hibernation so that, you take advantage of special relativity. You kind of go fast enough and, you sleep and you wake up and you make it and everybody back on Earth is dead. Right. So that is an option. It's not a very continuous, like it doesn't like let us be connected with people who have traveled, but at least some of us could get out there. The fact that we have general relativity and quantum mechanics that we still really haven't resolved. And general relativity really tells you that space and time can be bent in interesting ways. And that there's just, to my earlier comment of what we don't know, it looks like it would be very hard to do the equivalent of warp drive, but there's nothing in general relativity that fundamentally rules it out yet. To me says we're going to figure that out. Now, how quickly and when, no idea. And again, this is my gut, not anything scientific, but I know it's not ruled out, and that's what makes me optimistic. So, Kyle, I really think if it's going to be meaningful, we're going to have to figure that piece out somehow, because we're going to want to stay connected as we travel.
Mm-hmm.
Very good.
Yes.
So as we wrap up here, I do want to ask, where can people find you? They're looking for more information about your studies and about your positions. Where can they find it?
So I attempt to be on Twitter. I'm not as regular as I should be, and it's just my name flipped, so it's at Dennin Michael instead of Michael Dennin. So it's easy to find. I'm on Instagram too, but even less. I do try to get stuff on Facebook at Prof Dennin Michael, because somehow Dennin Michael was stolen. I don't know how. I have a lot of fun talking about science and everything pop culture and movies on a podcast with a very long name. It's Fascinating Gadgets, Gizmos, and Gear-Based Technology. But you can find it just by going to fgggbt.com. So F3Gs, a B, a T.com. That's where I get to really like stretch my imagination and spread out, because we take the strangest movies and I try to explain how you could actually make that happen, which is my attempts to explain warp drives, Kyle. So that's where all records of my attempted space travel is.
Have you guys broken down like that movie Event Horizon?
We have not done Event Horizon. I would love to do that one. Lately, we've done a lot of the ones with consciousness and upload and reminiscence and memories and stuff. So that's been fun.
Like that one with Scarlett Johansson?
Yeah. And then, you just Google me on YouTube and Sam, as you said, you get to find all my fun, Star Trek, Star Wars tech, Spider-Man tech, Superman, science and Superman stuff, and my lectures on religion and science. And if people really want to, they can read my book, Divine Science, Finding Reason at the Heart of Faith.
All right. I found your podcast.
Yep. That's where the podcast is. So excellent.
FGGGBT.com. There it is.
And so Dan Glenn and Ben Siepser. So Ben's the engineer. So we, as the physicist and engineer, we got that covered. And Dan's our host / he calls himself the analytical mastermind, who helps us with. Also, he's got a master's in television, so we actually can understand what's going on in the TV and movies that we watch.
Nice. Well, we hope everybody will check that out. Michael, it has been a pleasure.
Oh, it's been awesome talking to you guys.
You've got things to do, so we're gonna wrap it up. But for everybody who's listening, thank you, Patrick, especially for your comments. And please like, comment, share, subscribe. Also check out all of Michael or Dr. Dennin's projects that he's got going on, the podcast, the Twitter. He's got a ton of lectures that are available on YouTube that you can check out. And we look forward to seeing you and many more things in the future.
Well, love to. Thanks.
All right. Until next time, keep on exploring the edges of the unknown.